Friends, thank you for being here today. In the turbulent theater of international relations, President Donald Trump has always cast himself as the strong man, the master negotiator, the deal artist who can bend nations to his will through sheer force of personality and economic might. What if I told you this entire persona was a facade, a house of cards ready to tumble at the slightest breeze? What if the master negotiator was, in fact, being consistently outplayed by a supposedly weaker hand? Yet, his recent actions toward America's northern neighbor, Canada, tell a starkly different story. After a Canadian anti tariff advertisement cleverly leveraged the words of Republican Messiah Ronald Reagan against the Orange One, Trump has once again thrown his toys at the pram. He called off all trade talks and announced a punitive 10% additional tariff on Canadian imports. This move, however, is not the calculated maneuver of a geopolitical grandmaster. It is an orange tantrum, a public admission of failure, and the latest evidence that the president is losing control of the very trade war he began. The context of this tantrum is crucial. This is not a 10% tariff on all Canadian imports, a move that would shatter supply chains and incite economic chaos on both sides of the border. It is, like so many of his threats, a sign of weakness, a flailing reaction from a leader who has been consistently outplayed. It's not just China that has learned how to play Trump. Canada has been doing so successfully for years, from strategic boycotts of American goods to the brilliant political jujitsu of using Reagan's own free trade rhetoric against Trump's anti-free trade measures. Canada has crafted a robust playbook for managing its volatile neighbor. Trump's attempt to act the strong man is, in reality, an obvious admission that the so-called deal artist has yet again failed to secure the deal he wanted. His attempts to strong-arm Canada only to have to run home to mama crying trace a long and embarrassing pattern. An examination of the evidence reveals a chaotic, emotional, and incoherent approach to trade negotiations, one that disciplined negotiators in Canada have easily exploited. There are 5 clear signs that Trump's position is not one of strength, but of escalating weakness. The first and most glaring sign of Trump's failing strategy is his reliance on a hair-trigger diplomacy driven almost entirely by personal emotion rather than rational long-term calculation. In the high-stakes world of global trade, where stability and foresight are paramount, Trump's actions are explosive, personal, and reactive. He treats international summits not as forums for careful negotiation, but as stages for personal drama, and he perceives any disagreement not as a standard feature of diplomacy, but as a deep personal slight. This pathology was perfectly illustrated years ago during his infamous blow-up at the then Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, after a G7 summit. The summit itself had been contentious, but a joint agreement, a communique, had been painstakingly hammered out. Then, in his closing press conference, Trudeau simply repeated Canada's long-standing, clear, and predictable trade position. He stated that Canada would not be pushed around and would proceed with its own retaliatory tariffs, a standard sovereign response. Trump, who had already departed on Air Force One, apparently caught the press conference on television. He did not see a fellow leader asserting his country's national interest. He saw a personal attack. He felt blindsided, insulted, and in his view, betrayed. What followed was not diplomacy, it was a fit of peak broadcast to the world via social media. From the sanctuary of Air Force One, Trump unleashed a series of furious tweets. He branded Trudeau as dishonest and weak, a stunningly personal insult to the leader of one of America's closest allies. But he didn't stop at name calling. In an act of breathtaking caprice, he announced that the United States would be pulling its signature from the joint G7 agreement that his own team had just finished negotiating. This, the video argues, was the actual act of weakness. A strong leader, a true deal artist, gets the statement they want in the agreement. A weak one who has been outmaneuvered or has failed to assert his position effectively, runs away from the whole deal and tries to light the table on fire on his way out. Trump's defenders often try to spin these outbursts as a calculated chess move, a madman theory designed to generate chaos and panic, which Trump can then exploit to gain the upper hand. The evidence simply does not support this charitable interpretation. These are not surgical strikes. They are public outbursts that shake allies, undermine his own negotiating team, and erode American credibility. When a leader tears up high-stakes diplomacy over a standard issue press conference, it suggests that his personal feelings and his fragile ego are getting in the way of the country's economic goals. This isn't strategy, it's a liability. Trump doesn't have the excuse of having been dealt a bad hand. He conducts these talks from the position of leading the world's most powerful economy. There are countless leaders of weaker countries who must skillfully play a bad hand to punch above their weight. Trump always begins with the strongest hand imaginable, holding all the high cards, and yet time and time again, he still keeps folding. When a leader's ego is the primary driver of foreign policy, it is not a show of strength. It is a neon sign flashing to the entire world that they are losing control of the process. The second sign of the trouble endemic to Trump's strategy is the constant, bewildering public confusion that emanates from his own administration. A foundational principle of any successful negotiation is a unified front. Your opponent must believe that your team is on the same page, speaking with one voice and executing a single coherent plan. The Trump White House, however, has been a case study in the exact opposite. Throughout the tense years-long talks for a new NAFTA, which eventually became the USMCA, a clear and damaging pattern emerged. President Trump would make a huge market-rattling threat, and his own senior economic advisors would immediately scramble to clean it up. He repeatedly threatened to kill NAFTA altogether, a move that would have instantly sparked economic chaos, shattered continent-wide supply chains built over decades, and vaporized millions of jobs. The markets would, predictably, panic. Then, like clockwork, top economic advisors at the time, figures like Larry Kudlow, would be dispatched to the television studios. Their job was not to reinforce the president's threat, but to diffuse it. They would insist that the president was just negotiating, that talks were actually going well, and that nobody was really talking about tearing up the agreement. Their motivation was clear. They had to calm the terrified markets and reassure the business community. This bizarre spectacle created a weird, dysfunctional, good cop, bad cop vibe with one crucial distinction. In a real good cop, bad cop routine, the cops are working together. They have a coordinated plan. This was not a clever tactic. This was a symptom of profound internal chaos. It was the bad cop, Trump, going completely rogue, driven by impulse, while the good cops, his advisors, frantically tried to undo the damage and keep the negotiations from imploding. This split between Trump's impulsive threats and his team's desperate reassurances signaled to Canada and to the entire world that the United States government did not have a coherent strategy. Or, if it did, the president himself was willing to tear it up on a whim based on what he saw on cable news that morning. When your own advisors are constantly publicly walking back your statements, it tells your opponent that your policy is in disarray, driven by impulse, not a plan. This internal dysfunction handed Canada's more disciplined, unified, and professional negotiators a clear and decisive advantage. While the White House was a daily storm of chaos, conflicting messages, and raw emotion, Canada's response has consistently been the polar opposite. This is the third and perhaps most strategically significant sign that Trump's position is fatally weakening. Instead of taking the bait, instead of descending into the mud pit of personal insults and Twitter feuds, Prime Minister Trudeau's government and now Prime Minister Carney's government adopted a steady hand strategy. It has been a masterclass in disciplined modern statecraft. The Canadian approach has been defined by three simple, powerful characteristics. They remained calm, they remained firm, and they never, ever strayed from their message. When Trump first launched his tariffs on steel and aluminum, claiming Canadian metals were a national security threat, an assertion that was absurd on its face, Canada did not just complain. It did not just file a WTO complaint. It hit back. It responded with perfectly calculated dollar for dollar retaliatory tariffs. But these were not a blunt instrument, they were a scalpel. The target list was strategically chosen to inflict maximum political pain on key Republican districts and states. They targeted bourbon from Kentucky, maple syrup from Maine, and agricultural products from the Midwest. The message was clear. If you hurt our workers, we will ensure your political base feels the pain. Yet, even while punching back with precision, Canada always kept the door open for talks. The message from Ottawa was flawlessly consistent. We will not be bullied. We will defend our interests. But we are not interested in a trade war. We are ready to negotiate a modern, fair agreement as soon as you are serious about it. This calm, prepared, and perpetually adult approach made Canada look like the stable, reliable partner on the world stage. It drew a stark, devastating contrast to Trump's volatility. By refusing to get dragged into a war of words, Canada completely neutralized Trump's main tactic, which is intimidation and outrage. His entire strategy is designed to create panic, to bully his opponent into a quick surrender. But that strategy completely falls apart when your opponent refuses to panic. The same pattern we witnessed between Trump and Trudeau is now playing out predictably between Trump and Carney. The reason is simple. Canada already established, tested, and proved this playbook for years. Carney is now simply leaning into it. Trump is the one raging, throwing tantrums, and calling off talks. Carney just looks on with a bemused, steady gaze, holding the stronger hand. The fourth sign of Trump's strategy unraveling is that his biggest weapon, the tariff, is proving to be far less potent and far more of a bluff than he thought it would be. The central idea behind Trump's easy-to-win trade war was to inflict so much immediate, unbearable economic pain on Canada that it would have no option but to cave to his demands. As of late 2025, this has demonstrably failed to occur. The trade war is ongoing precisely because Canada has been surprisingly and skillfully adept at softening the blow. Canada has shown it can absorb the hit. Furthermore, it has shown it can modulate its own response. For instance, during negotiations back in September, Canada strategically removed some of its counter tariffs to show goodwill, but it pointedly kept them on the most politically sensitive American goods like steel and automobiles. This was not a concession, it was a signal. It was a clear demonstration that they could dial the pressure up or down as needed, that they were in control of their own response. Even more importantly, Trump's threats are largely hollow because of the deep integration of the two economies. As many reports have noted, a huge portion of US Canada trade, well over 85%, is already tariff free thanks to exemptions in the existing agreements. So when Trump belligerently announces he is slapping an extra 10% tariff on goods, he almost certainly does not mean all goods. He means a small fraction of the remaining 15% of goods that are not already covered by these agreements. And even then, it is highly unlikely to be all of that 15%. Why? Because Trump knows he cannot tear up the entire existing tariff free agreement. To do so would unleash unimaginable economic chaos in America, shuttering auto plants in the Midwest, sending lumber prices skyrocketing, and disrupting energy markets. He cannot inflict unbearable pain on Canada without also inflicting unbearable pain on his own economy and his own voters. This doesn't mean the tariffs cause no harm. Of course they do. They have created profound uncertainty, messed with critical supply chains, and cost jobs on both sides of the border. But Canada's measured response, combined with the underlying reality of the trade relationship, has shown that Trump's ultimate threat is a bit of a bluff. Canada has proven it can take the punch, and it has proven it can punch back. And when your opponent can withstand your best shot, you have lost control of the fight. At this point, a smart negotiator would realize they need another strategy. But Trump isn't about other strategies. He just puts his head down and charges even as his leverage evaporates. The fifth, final, and perhaps most crucial sign of Trump's terminal weakness is one that his team seems to be missing entirely. The world has changed. While Trump is myopically focused on fighting a 20th century trade war over steel and cars, dairy, and lumber, Canada is quietly playing a 21st century game. And in this new game, Canada is building the leverage that will define the next 50 years. That leverage comes from critical minerals. The United States has identified a massive strategic vulnerability in its own economy, its heavy, dangerous dependence on countries like China for the critical minerals and rare earth metals needed for everything in the modern world. We are talking about the essential components for iPhones, for the batteries in electric vehicles, and for the guidance systems in advanced defense technology. America's recent deal with Australia to secure some of these minerals underscores how serious this vulnerability is. And this is where Canada holds the ultimate trump card, if you'll pardon the expression. Canada is a huge, secure, and friendly source of many of these exact minerals, located right on America's doorstep. The Canadian government is actively working to scale up its production of lithium, cobalt, and various rare earth metals. While its output may not yet be at the level of global leaders like China, it is strategically positioning itself as the reliable, stable, allied supplier that the United States will desperately need to build its high-tech and green economy. Who would you rather deal with, Don? Do you want to be reliant on China, or do you want to be reliant on Canada? Former Canadian ministers have argued correctly that this gives Canada a powerful long term advantage for all future talks. While Trump is squabbling over dairy quotas, he is ignoring the fact that the United States will soon be begging Canada for the essential building blocks of its entire modern economy and national security infrastructure. Canada has taken the long term approach, while Trump is changing his mind several times a week based on whether he got the right toy in his breakfast cereal. This long term pivot means that even if Trump scores the odd temporary point in a skirmish over timber, his overall strategic leverage is weakening by the day as Canada becomes more and more essential to America's future. Beyond these tactical failures lies a deeper, more profound strategic blunder, a sixth and overarching sign of weakness, the needless, reckless, and self defeating alienation of America's closest allies. Trump's America First doctrine has never been about putting America in a leadership position. In practice, it has meant America alone. His worldview is a purely transactional zero sum game where for America to win, someone else must lose. This fundamentally misunderstands the very source of American power for the past 80 years, which has been built not on walls, but on a network of strong democratic alliances. By treating steadfast partners like Canada, the European Union, Japan, and South Korea as adversaries, he is committing a form of geopolitical self harm. The US Canada relationship is the poster child for this folly. This is not just any trade relationship, it is the largest bilateral trade relationship in the world, built on the longest undefended border. It is a partnership defined by shared values and a deeply integrated shared defense structure, most notably NORAD. For Trump to invoke national security as a pretext for tariffs on Canadian steel is not just absurd, it is a profound insult. It sends a chilling message to every U.S. ally on earth. If this is how America treats Canada, what hope do we have? It signals that America's word is no longer its bond and that decades of loyalty can be incinerated on the whim of one man's ego. The long term consequences are catastrophic. A spurned Canada does not simply sit and wait to be punched again. It diversifies. Trump's volatility has been the single greatest catalyst for Canada to accelerate its trade relationships with the rest of the world. It pushed Canada to finalize the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, with the European Union and to champion the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, the very agreement Trump abandoned on his first day in office. Trump is, in effect, actively incentivizing his closest neighbor to build a future that is less reliant on the American market. This is not winning. This is a massive, long term, strategic own goal. And who benefits from this self inflicted isolation? America's true adversaries. Russia and China watch with unmitigated glee as the President of the United States systematically dismantles the Western alliance, doing their work for them at zero cost. While Trump is busy picking fights with Mark Carney over an advertisement, China expands its Belt and Road Initiative, securing the strategic resources and partnerships that America is busy discarding. This isn't just a bad hand or a different strategy. It is the strategic equivalent of sawing off the very branch one is sitting on. It is the ultimate sign of an amateur who, in his quest to look tough, has made his country and its entire alliance structure profoundly weaker. This is why Canada is able to look so calm, so unbothered in the face of the raging storm on its southern border. Prime Minister Carney has a mandate from the Canadian people to get tough with Trump, and he has the distinct advantage of knowing that history is on his side. He also has the advantage of knowing that while America has access to top tier, brilliant trade negotiators, those negotiators are being constantly undermined by their own boss, who keeps unilaterally announcing new, chaotic moves without strategy meetings. Trump has often said that he thought a critical mistake from his first term was listening to the experts. They blunted his own natural skills, he thought. And so, in his second term, he has been determined to act on his own instincts. But his instincts, to put it plainly, are pants. They are chaotic, emotional, and self defeating. And so, even leaders with, on paper, a weaker hand are still getting Trump to fold. Because far from being a master at the art of the deal, Donald Trump is, and has always been, an unranked amateur.